My name is Beth Lang, and I'm one of the 3 co-directors for Women Who Code Atlanta. The other 2 co-directors are Erica Stanley, who who's here. Hey, Erica. And also founded our chapter or network, and also Angel Banks, who I don't think could make it tonight. But if you're interested in speaking or anything like that, then you can get a hold of us. And Amy is going to present today. And so she's going to put up some slides in just a minute. And one of those slides will have a lot of contact information. So if you want to follow us on Twitter, or what I think is one of the best ways is to get on our Slack channel. And that's really a great way to ask questions, get to know people, especially now when we don't have in-person events and things like that. So people are welcome to leave their cameras off or turn their cameras on, whichever makes you more comfortable. What we'll do is, once we get started with the presentation, is if you have a question, you can either put it in chat, or you can just say that you want to ask a question, and then I will kind of moderate so that Amy doesn't have to pay attention to 10 different things while she's speaking. So does that make sense for everybody? So awesome. So funny not to have any response. So Amy, do you want to put the slides up and we'll get started?
Yeah. Cool.
Awesome.
Can everyone see?
Yes.
We can.
Cool.
Awesome. So for anybody who's not familiar with Women Who Code, Women Who Code is a global nonprofit organization. So we have chapters worldwide in many countries, and our focus really is helping women excel in their technical career, whether that is starting out or up-leveling. And so we in Atlanta have several monthly programs. When things are normal, we have we usually have a sort of a major event, which is having a speaker, and that's usually at General Assembly on a Tuesday night at 7 p.m. And usually we do a nice job of having a meal and things like that, and having some good social time. We also have something called Code Jam, which is where people just come and hang out. It's a more casual kind of thing. And we had started having lunches once a month, and those were super successful. So we've decided to take those online and make them virtual. So that being said, we're sort of figuring out what works during this time of virtual meetings. So we do have an upcoming event on September 30th. And so Eric is going to talk about an introduction to open source, with the idea of people participating in Hacktoberfest. And so, which is pretty much run by DigitalOcean, and they've done a really good job this year of getting that information up and out really early. So we're excited about that. And we love when people get their shirts or get their 5 PRs so they can get a shirt. Whether they get their shirt or not, it's still good. And then October 1st, we're going to do one of those virtual lunches that I talked about. Those are super casual. It's really just come and hang out and meet people. We've had one where it felt like almost everybody was in a boot camp, and it was just great to be able to meet other people. We've had other ones where people were like looking for their job, their first job or a job. And so there was a lot of networking and advice. So anyway, it's the conversation is really driven by who shows up, but it's also people are just generally super, super nice. So Amy, if you can go to the next slide, that'd be great. And so these are all the ways that you can get in touch with us. And these will be available, and the recording will be available later, but we put the slides up usually on our meetup page. And like I said, I highly suggest getting into our Slack channel if you're interested in connecting with people. It's a great way to do everything from, say, hey, I'm thinking about going to a boot camp, to, hey, I'm thinking about getting my master's in computer science, to I'm looking for a job and I think that this company is really cool. Does anybody work there? Or, you know, anything in between. So there are a lot of different rooms. We actually had somebody recently start a startup Slack channel. So it's whatever people are interested in. It's great to find like-minded people who are interested in the same thing. So can't say enough about what a good environment that is. And people are generally extremely nice and helpful. And if somebody doesn't answer you, it usually means people are super busy and you should ask again in a couple of days. So, um, so let me introduce Amy. So I'm really excited to introduce Amy. Amy is a self-taught or community-taught web developer, and she has her first job at 7-Factor Software. And I'm not going to read the slide to you because you can read a little bit about what she does, but I did want to take this opportunity to ask Amy to talk a little bit about how did you learn software development? Because you describe yourself as community taught and self-taught. And so what does that mean?
Yeah, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just want to check. Yeah, so I started learning on my own. I knew at the time one person that had done a career change through a boot camp. And I have to give credit, it's actually my husband that suggested to me that I should try out coding. But I think he had to suggest it like 3 times before I really agreed because it was just not part of my world at the time. I have a bachelor's degree in music therapy, and I had done other jobs in related to teaching and employee development. But as I got more into it, I fell in love with it along the way. And I went to a ton of meetups, a lot of Women Who Code events. It was a huge part of my learning journey, both to meet people and get the information as well and figure out what skills were needed in this area and kind of what to learn next was really important. So that's really a main reason why I wanted to speak was just because I personally got so much out of events. So I wanted to try and provide something during this time when it's so tricky to be able to not get together in person.
No, thank you so much, and we really appreciate that. It was a little bit of a kick for us to get started with events again. We kept going, maybe next month we can have in-person events, maybe next month, but I don't think it's going to be next month. I think it's going to be a little bit longer. So thanks for giving us the kick to do some virtual events. So that's awesome. And can you talk a little bit about what you do, like your process of getting your first job? Because I know that that's really challenging for people, and a little bit about what your kind of day-to-day is like.
Yeah, so when I first started, even from the very beginning, I always kept track of how many hours each week I would be able to find to code while I was working in another job. And so that was really helpful to me. And then I kind of set like a goal, like after a certain number of hours that I did, kind of based on the average boot camp, essentially. Or what I thought would be appropriate. I kind of decided like this is the point where I am just going to start applying because you always feel like you're not ready. But you just have to take the jump and just really get your resume and your few portfolio projects and just go for it. And so, as I mentioned, I try to go to a bunch of events. But I also think it's important when you do go to an event or meet people, you want to be able to introduce yourself with really what makes you unique. What do you bring to the table? And that's what I did, especially towards the end where you start seeing yourself really as being hireable. But that's what I did when I ended up meeting the connections that ended up helping me get the job that I have now and that I really love a lot. Um, so to go more into that, the company that I work for is called 7-Factor Software, and we build custom software for clients. So every day we're building a project. Sometimes it's repairing, or building onto an existing code base. Sometimes we get to start from scratch, which is always really fun. But every day I'm writing code, a lot of times talking with customers in a group setting, getting feedback and, demoing things together with a team and adapting and really problem solving. So it's very much hands-on. Building custom software in a small team. I should say we only have about 20 people in the whole company, so we have really small teams that just get together and go on a project.
That sounds awesome. So you've been in your job for about a year, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is kind of a like a good time to kind of kind of reflect, which I think is exactly what you're doing. So I'm super excited to hear your talk and advice. So I'm going to let you take it away.
All right, great. Well, thanks so much for coming, everyone. So just to kind of let you know the format that I'm going for, my talk is about 45 minutes or so if no one says anything, but I'm hoping I'll be asking for people's input or opinions at several points. So I'm hoping that people chime in as well. And then I want to save some time at the end for anyone who wants to stick around. We'll stop the recording, I think, at that time so that people can feel comfortable and just have some time where if you'd like, as I said, you can introduce yourself and share what you're currently working on or doing, as well as what type of connections you're looking to make right now, whether it's people to encourage you or maybe even review your code on GitHub, or whether you're at that point of being hireable and you're looking for certain types of positions. So not sure who's all, on the call, but you never know when you might be able to help be that connection for somebody. So excited to have some time for that at the end. Well, to get started, this is probably one of my favorite quotes about leadership. It's from one of my favorite podcasts as well, in case anyone is looking for a new podcast at this time. But is everyone has influence. You're a leader if you're intentional with your influence. And I just think that's so powerful because it doesn't matter if you're thinking about, your family or your friends or, maybe a team. You just never know who is watching you and kind of modeling after you, and how somebody could be, listening to what you say, even when you think that they're maybe not. So I just think that's kind of a really cool foundation. And then this is my other favorite leadership kind of resource and thing that I just think that he explains things in a really cool way. So this author, his name is Daniel Goldman. He was the first person to write about the topic of emotional intelligence. About 20 years ago, he wrote this book. And of course, now it's more of a mainstream topic. But, at the time, he was kind of one of the first people to pull together a bunch of research and kind of make people believe that this actually matters. And then with this book, Primal Leadership, it came out just a few years ago, and he really breaks it down and applies the concepts of within emotional intelligence to what does that mean for leadership and for developing, just like developing yourself as a person. So to go into it, he kind of separates it into 4 quadrants of how you want to lead yourself. And it starts over on the top left with self-awareness. So you can see he kind of breaks down different subcategories. My favorite one that I was kind of surprised to see in that quadrant was self-confidence, because, sometimes we don't think of that as being a skill, but it actually is. Like if you think about it, I mean, you can't really get through your day if you don't have at least a little bit of confidence, to get out of bed and do whatever you need to do. So that's the first quadrant, along with just being aware, being aware of your own emotions, and maybe how you're coming across to others as well. And then the next quadrant is the self-management on the bottom. And of course, this includes things that you'll usually think of, like being able to control your temper, but it also includes things like being able to keep yourself motivated, to, keep studying by yourself or go to work, even when it's just you and your computer working from home, so those kind of like you're kind of like regulating yourself towards a certain goal. So those are, he kind of categorizes as that quadrant. And then the next kind of most difficult one, goes in order, is social awareness. That one can really be summarized, I think, in one word, just empathy. But it can be harder to do than it sounds, as we all know. And we've probably all worked with people at some point that you can just kind of tell, like, yeah, they struggle with empathy. And you don't really realize sometimes how valuable that is if you're able to kind of understand what somebody else might be trying to achieve in a situation, and that can help you, because then you're able to know like how you can help each other and what they're feeling, so that you're not just talking blindly. But then the next one is relationship management. And you can tell that this is kind of the most complicated or difficult level when you think about leadership or self-leadership, because this is where you get into inspiring somebody else, or trying to do conflict management or teamwork, maybe when things aren't going very well. You have to really try and bring people together or overcome a challenge. But I wanted to include this just as a resource for if anyone is also interested in this topic. I recommend both of his books, really. And also, he has some articles and things like that. Um, does anyone have any, I guess, questions or comments? And then the next points are more specific towards coding. But does anyone have any other things to note right away? Cool. Cool. Well, all right. So as I mentioned, this is more towards coding and coming into a company as a junior engineer. So I think it's really important to follow when you first start. You want to follow what's going on. The first point there is one of my favorite things. The code base is your documentation. And so for me, when I started, I interviewed in React. And then the first project that I was on, it was just happened to be in Vue. And I had never really looked at Vue in my life. So I had to learn the framework as well as the code base at the same time. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that's had a similar experience. But it was really helpful to me to really look at the code. I should say even my next project, I did 6 months on that project and then got moved to another project because they didn't really have that much need anymore there. So the next project that I did was spend 4 months working on a code base that was written in Angular, which I had also never really looked at before in my life. So from both of those experiences, I really learned that, yeah, you want to look and just, I think the Control F or find in path, find all is probably my favorite keyboard shortcut, because whenever I would have to build a new feature, I would try and find similar features that I can model mine after, and just to maintain, like it says, internal consistency, and really watch exactly how the existing engineers want the project to be, and just really maintain that, because someone has already made the decision, so your role is to just kind of follow and learn. So that's kind of one thing that I think is important. And then from kind of a different perspective, I also think when you're getting started, it's really important to look at or identify who are the people in your company that you can kind of look up to, whether it's from a coding perspective, like they're just really good at certain things that you're also interested in, and you kind of identify like, hey, I want to do what they do, or even from a more of a leadership perspective, where they're able to lead a team. They do a really great job of kind of organizing everyone, or certain skills that they have. So by doing that, you kind of have something that you can follow. And I think the research has shown too that people learn really well when they're literally following in the steps of an actual person. And I just wanted to encourage people too, like, don't be afraid. I know it can be intimidating sometimes to reach out to people, especially if they're more senior than you, or you just feel like, they probably don't even have time for me. But, in reality, they probably, if they remember, like, they were a junior engineer once, too, and they're especially if you're, really excited about your company or just something that you've maybe gotten to know about and an opportunity arises, like just take it, because you never know. It's always great to know more people just in your organization. So I would definitely challenge people to try and look for opportunities to connect, especially even now when it takes even more effort. Uh, this is my favorite. So this is me pretty much every day. I will have, 5 questions or maybe 20 questions, whatever it is. But this is definitely the life of a junior engineer, I feel, because there's so much new and you don't really have any prior similar experience when it comes to working on a big team in a large code base. But I just wanted to take a minute to just recognize that when you are asking a question, to be honest, there's so many things that can go wrong, right? And so I wanted to mention 2 of them. The first one can be, let's say you ask a question and the person responds with something that is so basic. Like maybe they start explaining to you what an array is, and you're like, oh my gosh, now this person thinks like I don't have a clue, and I have to try and tell them like, no, I understand that. I was asking this, and now you're just already off on the wrong foot, and you're probably stressed because now you don't know how to move forward with that. So that's not great. And then on the other extreme, I've also had the experience of you ask a question and then the answer that you get is like, yeah, now you're 10 times more confused than you originally were, because they just explained it in a very strange way, or they were talking about something else. And so that's frustrating as well. And so I think it's important to kind of figure out how to ask questions in such a way that you really get your answer like to the point and without too much hassle. Because the other thing to keep in mind is not everybody is naturally good, I don't think, at teaching. Like that's its own skill, and it has to be something that you kind of develop or improve at. I mean, if you just think about it, like if I'm going to explain something, I have to kind of figure out, okay, what do you already know? Where are the gaps? And like, how is it going to make sense to you? But like, there's just a lot to ask, someone who isn't like a trained in teaching, so um, that's where I think it's important. And the other thing, again, just being completely honest, if you happen to not be a white male, I think it's even especially important to ask your question in such a way that you're presenting yourself really well. And that's really not anything negative whatsoever against anyone at my company or really anywhere. It's just until we have more female minority CEOs that are running tech companies here in Atlanta as well as in Silicon Valley and around the country. I mean, it's just something like you want to present yourself really well, but not to worry. I have a strategy. I have, these are just a few things that I have kind of realized over this past year that have been really helpful, that I have kind of started doing more and more, that I wanted to share. So the first one is to kind of figure out, okay, is the root of your question about the language that you're working in, or is it about the framework? Like, for instance, you're building something on the front end. Is this a JavaScript feature that you don't know, or is this a React thing? And the reason that matters is it's going to tell you where you're going to find your answer, right? You're either going to be looking at the React docs, or you're going to be looking at MDN or some other similar JavaScript resource. And you'll notice that I did not even bother to put on here like, oh, Google your question. No, because I am assuming that if you guys are on this call, you are already very well aware that you're going to be Googling, you're ready for it, you're ready for all of that. But I think that's really not enough, right? Because if you Google it and then you don't find the answer, what are you going to do then? Now you're probably even more discouraged or confused. So the next thing that I do, and you're going to laugh, but I actually do this, like to this day, I do this frequently, is I'll write my question in a sentence. And the reason that I like to do that is because it forces me to kind of summarize the problem. I think sometimes when it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You're just like, why doesn't it work? But now you're forced to put it into words and get down to the core question, or put it in, some phrases. And that's kind of the next thing. So that way, when you're searching for it, you're kind of already thinking about like, hey, how can I describe this in words? And then I also tend to refine my question or make it better the more that I keep searching, because I'll realize like, oh, this is actually like, there's a name for whatever this is, like it's called object destructuring or whatever. But if you don't even know that that exists, it's going to be hard to search for. And actually, that's another thing that I have done at times too, is actually ask a teammate, like, what is, this called in lines 22 to 24, and that way they can help point you towards what is it that you need to learn about that you do not know at this time. So I think that's helpful. And then the other thing there, that with the arrows, that's just kind of in general my goal for finding information. I think we all know that sometimes the documentation is kind of confusing depending upon the different tool that you may be using. But it's good to start there, because ideally, at some point you can then go back, and that's like the original source, right? So it's the best. And then from there, usually reading articles, if you didn't quite get it yet, that can help, because it's somebody saying it just in a different way, or maybe giving different examples. So that's helpful. And then I try to save Stack Overflow for last. I mean, sometimes, of course, it'll just make sense to go there. But however, you do not want to be that person that just like uses some code that they found and it works, but you don't really understand it. that that's not a good thing. And so if I can, like, try to, try and refactor it, or at the very least just break it down and make sure I really understand, what's going on if I'm using code that somebody else wrote, essentially. And then the last point there, this is just something that I sometimes do, but if it's something that is a really new topic to me, I'll sometimes just write little notes about either how we're using that concept or that thing in this project that I'm working on, or just in general, like, how am I going to remember this, because it's probably going to come up again, right? And so rather than starting my search from the beginning, when I'm looking the next time, at least I can start from there. And that's been really helpful for me. I tend to, for each project that I've been on, I usually make like a giant text file, and then I'll just keep adding different things as I'm going and learning more things throughout the project, whether it's specific questions or even like how certain things about the backend or the API that I want to remember. So that's something that I like to do. Does anyone else have any good strategies as far as finding answers or anything that you like to do?
I don't have a suggestion, but I do have a question. It
Sure.
sounds like, and I just want to, it sounds like a lot of what you're doing in this is really figuring out and digging into what your problem statement is. Like, you're doing the work of figuring out exactly what you need to know and what you already know.
Yeah, that's a great way to summarize it. Yeah, and I'm
And
sure you're coming at it from the opposite perspective of like helping people figure out what they really are asking.
oh no, I think question asking is a skill that people develop, and it sounds like these are really good tools for honing in on what that question is. So that's super helpful. I think that what I've seen is when people get frustrated, especially with somebody who's new, a lot of the time it's because they feel like they're like, how do I do this? And they're not really asking a very clear question. And it sounds like you do a great job of having a super clear question. So that's really, really valuable.
Yeah, I hope this helps someone. It's helped me a lot. And like I said, just kind of things I realized I was doing over time as I tried to be like as self-reliant as I could. And that's something where I do think that when you are learning on your own, or even if you're like continuing your learning after a boot camp, you know, you're forced to find your own answers. And that's actually an advantage because you can't just, you know, raise your hand and someone tells you the answer. So I think most people, you know, encounter that throughout their learning journey, but it's just something to kind of remember that, hey, it's actually a very valuable skill and you can always keep improving at it. Well, great. This is actually just right along those lines as well. So this is something that I also tell myself pretty frequently, especially if I'm getting really discouraged, like trying to, you know, solve something that's taking a while. I'll just tell myself, you know what, you're on the verge of a breakthrough, even though it doesn't feel like it. Like you just have a few missing pieces and you're going to find those pieces, you know? And so I think it's just important to have that attitude. It kind of keeps me from getting, you know, too discouraged when I'm working, and definitely when I was studying on my own as well. And with that, so this is another thing that I try to adhere to or kind of keep in mind for the most part, which is that if you feel like you're flailing, it's time to start reading. And what I mean by that is, let's be honest, we have all had those times where we're just like trying different things and hoping that it works. But at some point you're like, wait a second, I'm just here like trying a few different ways of wording it or whatever, but clearly if I keep trying things and they're not working, there's something else going on below the surface, something that I do not understand. And so I try and take that as a cue of, hey, I need to go just take a step back from trying to solve my problem immediately and just really go and figure out, what do I need to understand more? Like, what is the topic that's beneath this that I don't know yet? So that's also helped me. And then another thing is just to assume that at least 2 or 3 solutions exist, or even more. And this is something that I didn't really realize as such when I first started, you know, because you're just so happy if like one solution works, which is totally fine. But then as you keep going, you kind of start to realize like, oh yeah, there's actually 2 ways I can think of, you know, that I would have solved this, or somebody else may have solved it differently. And so there's that side of it. But then I also think that that's really encouraging, because when you're struggling to find the answer, you can just kind of reassure yourself like, hey, someone else has probably solved this problem before most of the time, so I can keep going. And then catch yourself when you start to panic, or what I mean by that is if you start to get kind of worried about the thing, or you just feel like, I'm never going to find the answer. You will, but you might need to take a break. And also you might want to remember other very challenging things that you have solved in the past. That was another thing that I try to do a lot since I was learning on my own, was just remember like certain things that I had never done before, you know, and then a few weeks later could put that on the list of things I had done. And I've definitely seen this come into play now that I'm working as well. So it's crazy how many times you'll be trying to solve something, you know, in the afternoon or at night, because we have flex hours. And then all of a sudden there's no way, you have no idea. And then in the morning you wake up and your brain is fresh, and all of a sudden it just like clicks into place, or you think of something else because you're not burnt out from thinking about that same thing. So yeah, I just think it's good to kind of be aware of your energy, and try and, you know, work when you have a good energy versus trying to force yourself to keep going, you know, just because when you're not really achieving anything, or it's not really going, you know, what it could. And this is another thing, it's real similar, but this is something that I would literally tell myself, and I literally tell myself to this day, is just don't look down, because if you're just like this little tightrope walker, especially when you're a junior engineer, there's so much that you can feel like, hey, I don't know anything, I'm the most junior person on this team or whatever. But just like this guy, you have to just keep putting one foot in front of the other, and just kind of keep going as much as you can. So that's just something that I wanted to share because I think it's, you got to stay motivated somehow. Um, okay, so this slide here is about those times where you are at work and something happens or someone says something and you feel like it's a little bit not quite right, or you feel like someone should speak up and then you realize that no one else is going to. So it is up to you in a sense to decide whether you will speak up or not. And the first point here is actually based on another thing in psychology, which is that it's been proven that a lot of times it's easier to speak up or advocate for someone else versus advocating for yourself. And so I think that's cool because it means that you can kind of recognize the opportunity sometimes to say something for someone else. That happened to me within this past year, and I felt like, hey, I can do this, and I want to do this because maybe I have not the power to say as such, but it's a little bit more removed, but then when it's yourself. And so this is just a summary. I'm not going to go into too much detail or anything, but these are the steps in general that looking back, I kind of used or brought to the situation. So first of all, I tried to assume that the other person was not intentionally, hopefully at your company, they don't hire intentionally malicious individuals. But so I said something like, hey, I'm sure that you didn't mean for this to come across this way. Um, and then you kind of go to the second one, and this is how it came across to me, or this is how, I heard it. And that second point there, that's actually something that we talk about quite a bit at Seven Factor. Our founder, Jeremy, I know he has said it like many times, is communication occurs in the mind of the listener. And to me, that's just really important for any type of communication, because it means like, hey, even if I have really great intentions and I'm saying something, if the other person doesn't receive it that way, as the person who's speaking, like, that is still my problem. I have to change how I'm communicating, or like figure out, where did the message get lost in translation, because communication happens in the mind of the listener. So anyways, just saying, hey, your perspective on it, and then also saying what would be better. And this is, it could seem kind of hard, but it's something that you're both gonna do. Like, you're both gonna, agree to this thing that you share. It's like a common value, or maybe something in your company culture, but you wouldn't ask them to do something that you wouldn't also treat them that way, in return. So anyways, that's just kind of a few things to think about in terms of that. And then the last one is something that I try to hold myself to. I don't always achieve this, and I will also say, so I'm from Minnesota, and we do not confront by nature. We avoid as long as possible. But so for me, if I have kind of realized in my mind, like, I need to say something to this person or whatever, at least for me, I have to kind of talk to that person. If I go and, talk to someone else and say, hey, like, what should I do or whatever, all of a sudden I kind of lose steam. I will likely never talk to the original person. So that's why I try to do that. But again, I don't always. But so this is kind of, the how to think about speaking up things. Does anyone else have any other, ideas or things that you wanted to share at all? Cool. No problem. No problem. Well, this next one here, so these are some things that you could think about when you are working with your manager or getting to know your manager or your team lead. And this picture over here, this is supposed to be your manager's brain. So it's not that your manager doesn't care about you or they're not thinking about you, but it's very likely that they have like a million other responsibilities or things on their plate. So once you recognize that, it means that, hey, you want to be able to know kind of what you need from the manager. You want to be able to communicate how you work best. Like, for instance, let's say you have a manager that is kind of micromanaging you and they're checking in every hour, and you don't really need that. Maybe you want to advocate for yourself and just say like, hey, how about I give you an update every so and such in the afternoon, um, and just kind of, be able to know what works well for you. Or maybe you need to schedule a meeting with your manager, because you haven't talked to them in too long. It could be either way. So I think it's okay to do that. And then the next one here, this is just something that I like to do. I think sometimes it's easy to kind of forget what you are doing or how much you've done, like say in the course of a year, and then all of a sudden, maybe you're trying to ask for a raise or you're trying to leave the company and write your resume, but you like can't remember even what you did because it was so long ago. So I think it's nice sometimes to just, excuse me, make a little note about, certain things that you built or that you did or learned. um, so that's just like kind of something it can help you. It helped me stay motivated as well when I was just getting started, and kind of celebrate little things that I learned as I was getting going. And then the next one there, seeking out feedback. The reason I put that is, I mean, it can be very hard sometimes to hear feedback, or you're like, yeah, I want feedback, but really you just want, you just want to hear that you're doing great, which is fine too. But I think, yeah, if you're open to it and you try not to take it personally, but just as an opportunity to really become just the best that you possibly can, it takes it into a whole different light. And I think we're really lucky in engineering because we do have the code reviews that a lot of other professions, I mean, would never get that level of feedback. And we get it regularly if you're writing code. So just seeing it as that. And as you probably have learned by now, I am a note taker. So I have to be honest, and especially early on, I used to take notes on the comments that people would give me for my pull requests, because I was like, okay, they already told me once. It's my goal. I don't want to make them tell me the same thing again. And I don't mean for that to sound really stressful, like, you have to remember everything. Um, that's not what I'm trying to say, but it's just that, if they already told you, and then you can kind of make a list of things that you need to remember when it's super new. And that way you'll get different feedback. You'll figure out and learn about new things, rather than hearing the same thing. So I just think that that was something that really helped me, to just improve, as much as I could. So
Amy, can I just say
yeah.
that that's really, really good advice. And from a manager perspective, oh my God, yes. Um, it's really hard when somebody expects you to just remember everything that they've done. So for somebody to come in and say, well, here's things I've done and ask for feedback on them is super valuable. Um, and then I also think that it is helpful for you to know how you want, like what you're looking for, so that you can ask for what you need. And it's okay to say, I think what I really want is for you to give me some tough love, and then for you to come back and say, I don't think that was what I really needed. Can we try something else? Like nothing, like just because you said let's try this doesn't mean you have to always do that. So this is really good. And I also am a note taker, and I have like notebooks of just notes of from like every meeting and everything. It's super useful.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah. Thanks for mentioning. Cool. Well, this one is kind of about you as a junior engineer trying to fit in, I guess, to your organization. And so it's be visible. I think it's okay to, um, as I said, the first one, find quick wins within your first month or so of being there. And there's really two reasons for that. So number one, you want to feel like you belong there. You want to feel like you're able to contribute and it's a good fit, that you made a good choice in joining the team. And then for whoever hired you too, like you want them to feel that they made the right choice, other than choosing a different candidate, especially, it's so competitive right now. So just for them to know that, yep, this is a fit and this is good. And one thing, if there's nothing that's immediately obvious, one thing that you could do is just ask, hey, what have you not had time to fix? And one thing that I've noticed, kind of noticed already, is that a lot of times what will happen is people will build something one way and then a better or a different way will come out and they'll all of a sudden start using the new way, but they didn't have enough time to go back and refactor, the previous thing, whether maybe it's a form, that, oh, we're going to make our forms this way now. But by you helping with that cleanup, you're able to get to know the code base and they're able to feel good that they have more consistency, or that it's more clean and easier for the next person that might be trying to maintain it. So that's just an idea. And then the other next thing is just recognize opportunities. I know for a lot of people, there may be other, depending on your company, there may be other things that are going on besides just code, whether it's some type of volunteer organization or something just extra or something else. And it's great when you're able to bring other skills that you may have and help see where those can fit in, or just see, what you may be able to bring in general. And the next one there, speaking in most meetings. So I actually have a backup agreement on this from my wonderful coworker, Crystal, who has mentored many a junior engineer actually in her career already. But she agreed that, yeah, of course, you don't want to just ramble on about something that's not related, but, just making your voice heard. Like, for instance, let's say you're having a little team meeting and you're figuring out the architecture, how you're going to build something. Even if you're not the main person that's making that decision, it's still all right to just chime in and be like, hey, or that idea sounds great. It's just something small, but just making your voice heard, because your voice matters. And that way you just kind of feel like you're a part of things. And people remember that you have been hired and you are here. And then later, you get to know more people, sometimes virtually. That's kind of only time that you see everyone, maybe is at a meeting. So it's always nice, I think, hearing people's voices. And then the last one, this again, it could be just different for different companies. For us, it's kind of funny. In our public Slack channels, people will literally go back and correct their spelling of a word, even if it was very clear, like what the word is. And it may not be that way everywhere, I'm not sure. But this just goes along with presenting yourself in the best way that you can. I mean, as a junior engineer, you're already going to make like many mistakes, and that is fine. But just kind of following, if people don't care about grammar at your company, then obviously disregard, but just kind of following, what people are doing, and doing that as well. Now, this is my last little slide, but really, it's about knowing that you do bring something very unique to the table. So it's important, I think, to figure out the culture first. You don't want to just waltz in and say, I have a better idea, but you, as a new person, you do bring a new energy and creativity and a new perspective. So I think it's great to just remember that and just recognize that you might notice something that somebody who is just used to the way things are didn't really think of. For instance, so I actually have a little story, one last little story here for that. And the situation was at my previous project, we were building basically a payment system for users to kind of schedule and make payments for medical services. And so we needed a new UI screen that was going to allow them to combine multiple different instances of different visits, essentially, into one payment. And we didn't have a designer. For some reason, our team had already made several suggestions, but the client just still wasn't happy. They didn't like it. And our team, we were kind of running out of time. And we, at one point, we were just going to be like, hey, just choose between what we've already done, because, we just have to build something at this point. And I had some extra time. I had, like a few hours. No one was really expecting me to do anything in particular. And so I kind of just told the team, like, I have an idea. I'm just going to work on it real quick. And they ended up really liking and using my idea, which I literally just like inserted myself into the process and was like, hey, can I show you this? And that may not be, of course, appropriate like for all circumstances or situations, but in this case, I think they're still building that particular thing right now. As I mentioned, I'm not on that project anymore, but it's just important to remember that your perspective matters, and as I kind of mentioned before, the other skills that you bring to the role that you just happen to have and be good at really do matter. Like maybe you're a really good listener, and so you're really able to figure out what the user wants, or dissect through what they say to kind of figure out what they mean, and all those types of things. That's for our context, obviously, where we're building software for clients. But just remember that your voice matters, and you should just keep the fire and the passion going. So at this time, yeah, I want to know if anyone has any other advice or thoughts about getting started. Uh, and then after this, we'll go into a time of just introducing yourself if you would like to, and saying where you were at and maybe stopping the recording. But before we do that, does anyone have any other thoughts that they wanted to share at all?
So Amy, there's been some good questions along in the chat, and I just want to pull out some themes before we get to individual questions. And one of the themes is how did you do it? People are frustrated with the job hunting process, and especially if you're not going through a very traditional trajectory. But so people are frustrated by kind of applying for jobs and like being sort of auto rejected, so not even getting into the interview process and things like that. So can you talk a little bit about kind of, I know you talked about how you kind of equated like how much time would you spend in a boot camp, and you sort of had that as a number in your head of number of hours. But how did you present yourself? How did you overcome that, like, I don't have the credentials kind of thing that a lot of us have?
Right. No, I mean, that's a great point and a great question. And I mean, just to be honest with you, you probably will be rejected by recruiters and HR people, the classic gatekeeper people, because they're, like you mentioned, they are looking for the degree or the boot camp. Um, I literally had a Home Depot not reporter, what are they called? A recruiter, that I met at Refactor Tech, I think last year. And she was like, if you are serious about your career, you should probably do a boot camp, and like, so, and I mean, that's not to say that boot camps are bad or anything is bad, but that was very discouraging to me in that moment. So what I'm trying to say is they're going through the traditional routes of hiring, as in applying online. I did some of that, but I did not get a lot of results from that. Where I got a lot of, or how I got hired was through a connection that I met. And so in my personal case, I decided that I wanted to learn more about testing software. And so I learned about it. I had gone to some events where it was talked about. I think that's where I kind of excited about it. And I decided to make that like my thing that I was going to present myself as and look for a job that was somehow related to that. So I ended up going to a QA quality assurance meetup, not even knowing like what quality assurance was, except that it was something about testing. And I just introduced myself and said like, hey, I am looking to be a part of a company that puts a high value on testing. And I happened to meet someone, that was the connection. And so, I mean, I don't know, my heart just really goes out to people that are trying to do that, but not finding, the events right now. But yeah, I would definitely say just be creative as much as you can, reaching out to individuals on Slack. Women who code are always trying to be helpful as people can be, I think. But you definitely want to have personal projects as well. You definitely want to be active on GitHub, because that's the first thing. If I hadn't had anything on GitHub, I mean, I for sure would not have gotten hired. You want to have some projects that look somewhat professional-ish. I think I did mine based off of a tutorial, but then I changed a few things along the way to make it look, like my own. And I'll cut down my answer soon, but the reason I did that was because I knew that I didn't have a lot of people to ask questions of, so I wanted to do a tutorial so that I wouldn't like get discouraged in the middle of some brilliant project that I wanted to do that no one had ever done before. So that was just, my personal strategy as much as I can think of right now. But yeah, definitely try and go for the people and come with your skills in short.
So did you focus on having projects that you could show off so that you
Yes.
focused on kind of what you had accomplished?
Yes. Like I remember, man, I walked into the Refactor Tech conference with my little project pulled up on my phone so that I could, show it. And to be honest, I don't think I really made too many connections that ended up being fruitful, but it was good practice because I got used to, um, just telling people what I can do. So but yeah, something that you're working on with the intent of it demonstrating your skills. Like let's say you love apps or you want to be an app developer, just focus on that and make that your thing, because that's what you're going to be telling somebody is like, this is my thing, and they're going to trust you on that, hopefully.
So a lot of people, I think, so you talked about doing music therapy and how this was a change for you, and so I think a lot of people are kind of in that boat of whether they majored in something in college that was completely unrelated, or they're working in something completely unrelated, and then that change. And so I think a lot of people, if you applied, like especially a large company like Home Depot, which you mentioned, they have kind of an automated
Yes.
process that looks for keywords and stuff like that. And so it's really hard to get even into the process of a phone screen without hitting those things. So how did you find your job?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's see, uh,
I mean,
as
how did
I
you yeah, how'd you meet them? Did you apply based on an ad, or did you have a connection, or
Right. So, I mean, I went to this meetup and I met this individual. I said, I am, I have skills of writing unit tests for my code, and I'd like to work for a company that does that. And I started talking with this individual, and he then basically we had an email we shared an email connection, and he sent my resume directly to the person who was in charge of hiring at my company.
So
And
he worked at Seven Factor.
sorry, no, he is a friend of the CEO at my
Oh,
company.
okay.
hmm
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'm telling you what, it takes a lot of, I guess, courage is really the only way to say it. Let me tell you what, I went into the Atlanta Tech Village, and this was after I had made my little app that I decided was going to be like it wasn't even that great, to be completely honest with you. It was like a thing of you can put your favorite music albums, and then comment on other people. So it's like that type of a forum thing. But I was like, I have built this. I can build things in JavaScript. I literally went to the Atlanta Tech Village startup lunch day or whatever they used to call it every Friday. And they had a pitch practice, like elevator pitch practice that they were doing. And so I just like went to that, and I literally stood up and I was like, I am a JavaScript developer. I can build a website. I can help you build a website. And I literally got like a couple people that talked to me, and it was very exciting because I just randomly put myself out there. That reminded me, I actually got an interview out of a connection that I made at that lunch because I just forced myself to go up and talk to, sit down at a random table and try and strike up a conversation and say what my skills were. And so I actually got an interview out of that as well. So literally the only things I got were in-person connections. And so, I know it's hard, like probably very hard during this time, but yeah, just keep in mind that you want to somehow make some type of a personal connection, but also just know that if your other skills are very important. Like I have noticed that because I had a lot of experience working with people, not everyone happens to have that, and so it's been very useful to me. So it can seem like, oh, this is totally irrelevant, my previous experience, but as long as you just need that one person who's going to give you a chance, and then they will kind of realize, or if they're, hopefully they may already realize that, hey, this is a part of, diversity and people having different perspectives. But yeah, you just have to keep pushing and really push yourself out of your comfort zone. That's what I did, until you find that few connections.
That sounds really good. Somebody also, Saul has a question about how long you studied and so forth. And I know that you kind of set a goal of like this much time, but how other than kind of number of hours, did you have any sort of body of knowledge, or how did you pick how did you select React, for example,
Yeah.
so that you knew that you were at a point where you were ready to start applying?
Right, that's a great question. That's another, I think, really challenging thing when you're learning or learning by yourself, or even after boot camp, is like what is relevant. And I kind of relied on what types of events were going on. And I noticed that there's a React group. Even to this day, I believe I have seen meetups popping up for the React group. And I noticed that it was the most active group in terms of frameworks. Like there wasn't really a Vue.js group or anything like that. So that's one way I kind of realized that, hey, in the Atlanta market, this is where it's at. This is a good skill because it's probably something that more people are going to be looking for. And then also, somewhere, I think at a meetup, someone told me that, hey, it's oftentimes easier to get your first job working on the front end. And then after that, you can maybe transition, but I think there's a little bit maybe less room for doing damage if you're working on the front end. So maybe that's why. I don't know if anyone else has a perspective on that, but I think it's generally still good advice. Like you want to make sure you have, some front end skills. You don't have to feel pressure to learn every framework. That's a huge temptation, or like point of uncertainty. I remember when I was learning, it's like, oh my gosh, maybe I should learn Java instead. Like maybe I should learn this. But I think it's important, just, focus on the front end, one framework. You don't have to learn them all because you can easily learn them later, unless maybe they're making you learn it for the interview or something. But if they're I don't know, smart, I would say they can know that, hey, you can learn another one later, but just at least one front-end framework. And then I built an API, right, to build like a full stack application. And I think that's nice to be able to say, like, I did that. But beyond that, yeah, try not to get too distracted by the latest like trend and just go deep into what you want to be like your selling point. I think that can be, yeah, definitely a distraction. So you want to stay focused.
That makes a lot of sense. Saul, did that answer your question about kind of how to how to create kind of a finish line? Yes. Okay. So Yingrong has a question about and obviously you started your job when we were still having face-to-face events and things like that, but the world is a little bit different. And so without face-to-face events, do you have any advice as far as making connections and things like that? How to kind of replace that so that because it sounds like going to meetups and actually talking to people was a really good entry point for you to actually get to the interview process.
Mm-hmm. I would definitely say make sure your portfolio site is there. Like you want it to be super easy for the person to understand what you're about and have just an example, that you can share with them really easily. The other thing is well, this is something that I did at least was writing some articles, technical blog of some sort, and it doesn't have to be a super challenging topic. I think that's like a common thing that people think, like it has to be some brand new idea, but in reality, it's actually super helpful for other people that are also just starting because the way that you might explain something might make perfect sense to somebody else, So by writing down something that you're learning, it's helpful for you because then you can go back. I heard somebody like Wes Boss or somebody that is like a teacher and a podcaster say that they write articles so that when they forget what they did, they'll be able to go back and remember. But I mean, much more to your point, like you want to have an online presence to where that person can Google you and the right types of things will come up. Um, Other things would be, I mean, it's uh, how should I say? If you can find an actual company and volunteer for them, whether it's a startup, because now at least you can put that on your resume of like, I, did a few things, which was a real thing for a real company. And that way, when you talk to somebody, whether you're reaching out, um, I mean, reaching out on LinkedIn can be good, but if someone doesn't answer you, it's probably just because, they're busy. So try not to get too discouraged, but try to find, events if you at all can that are virtual. I know that there's not really a lot, um, but yeah, those are some of the first things that I would think of. There may be other advice that people are talking about and blogging about right now too. But yeah, it's definitely challenging times. So hopefully everyone's able to, make money some other way and just keep growing your portfolio and your skills and just be ready, for when that breakthrough introduction happens so that you're ready.
Yeah, I think that writing is a really good idea. And I think that as much as it's problematic in many ways, putting stuff on Twitter, like linking to articles on Twitter, is actually a pretty good way to kind of get the word out. And I've seen that there's a lot of people on Twitter who, as like people who've been laid off and things like that, that's become kind of a good place. That and LinkedIn seem to be two good places for kind of highlighting people who are looking and things like that.
Yeah, that's right. I couldn't handle Twitter, but I know that a lot of people like benefit so much from it. So, yeah, definitely. That's awesome.
You got to be careful what you read for sure. So take that warning to heart. But I think LinkedIn is also a really good place to publish your articles and so forth.
Mhm.
And I'm blanking on her name. I'm going to see her. Nate is her husband. Um, oh shoot. anyway, she is a little bit similar in that she started to publish her like every single day on LinkedIn, her project and things like that.
Yeah, can really help.
And I think that, and she, it took about a year, probably a little more than a year for her to actually get a job, but she got a job and is doing really well. But I think that that publication, as you suggested, was a really good differentiator.
Hmm. Yeah, the other thing that I guess I should say I did was I actually spoke at a it was a smaller meetup. Well, it was a Google developer group. They used to have little meetups, and it would be primarily more so junior people that would come. And so I was like, this is this is a good fit. I don't want to speak to like senior engineers as I'm not even having a job right now. But, if the opportunity or if anyone even suggests it and you feel like you have something that you know about, that was so great. I did it partly just so I could put it on my resume of like, I spoke at an event. And I think, I mean, it shows initiative. It shows that you're feel knowledgeable about a certain topic and it gets you exposure. You're able to meet people there. So if you're at that point, definitely go for that. And there's also people that will help you if you're nervous about speaking because it's definitely very intimidating at first, but then as you do it more, it's a skill just like any other skill. So that's also a really good one, if you find a way to do it, that I really recommend as well.
So somebody else also asked about, as you're starting out, where is the best place to show off your coding and practice coding and things like that?
I want to understand your question more. Are you looking for like a website or more so a group?
Kind of a platform to practice and create projects.
And
And so
other
I
people,
kind
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I mean, GitHub is pretty standard, I would say. You want to, I mean, the good thing with GitHub is it's free. You can even make your portfolio site, and if it's just like a static or whatever site, you can host it on GitHub, I believe. So it will have like the GitHub domain, but then you could even buy your own domain name, um, I believe. And so, that's a good. Did you have other thoughts with that too?
No, I think GitHub. I mean, you could be on GitHub, you could be on GitLab, you can be on Bitbucket, but GitHub is
Yeah.
free as long as it's public. So yeah, I agree. I like the price point. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and you can go and do projects that you found or tutorials or whatever, and just put them up on GitHub. And that way, so one of the things that sometimes people think is that they should like clean up and make their project look perfect. Like if you started a project and like a year later, you're like, oh my God, look at my code. Oh, I'm so embarrassed. Oh, but what you really want to demonstrate is like you started here and then you got better and got better. And so you can show that history on GitHub so that people can see your progression. A lot of the time people are looking for somebody who can learn. I mean, Amy, you talked about how you knew React and that's what you interviewed as somebody who knows React. And then your first project was in Vue. Um, and then your
Mm-hmm.
second was in Angular. So all that React knowledge, while it gave you a good base, was also, not what you were doing. And so if you have somebody who's like, I only do Angular, that's all I do, that's probably not a good fit for your company.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think that people who are so GitHub is a great place to highlight and showcase things. But I think people who are looking for like, even if you go to Georgia Tech and you learn and you are doing computer science, you might never do JavaScript, or barely do JavaScript, and you might want to learn JavaScript, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you there are a lot of sites and tutorials out there, but I think Free Code Camp is really good because number one, it's free, and number two, it just walks you through, like with JavaScript, it actually gives you a
Mm-hmm.
challenge, and then there's a unit test so that when you get it right, you pass it, and it's kind of a nice setup. I know they've added more things. I don't know if they all work the same way, but
Yeah, I used that. That was the first thing I ever did. And yeah, it's so encouraging because you learn and it's certain fundamentals, that you're gonna need to know. And then, so what I did was I started with Free Code Camp but then I realized, hey, I need to kind of integrate these little things and kind of tie them together. So personally, the tutorial or one of the tutorials that I used was by Colt Steele, Coltsteele. I think his courses are like highly rated. You probably find them right away, but I think that he explains things in a really clear way, and it always made sense to me. And he also has examples as well as projects that you can do or kind of tweak a little bit as you're doing them. That's what I did. Oh, the other thing that I wanted to mention was listening to tech podcasts was super helpful to me as well. There's one called Base CSS that is talking about, for somebody like me that didn't have that computer science background. It's a woman, and she talks about like algorithms, but in a really understandable and relatable way. And so you kind of feel like you have this insider knowledge. Actually, just from podcasts in general, other podcasts that I like are uh, Syntax, which is, I think it's front end or JavaScript. Um, and I'm forgetting some other ones, but the reason I like podcasts is I always kind of felt like I was already in the industry because I was listening to these industry leaders talk, even when I wasn't really there yet. And some things will go over your head, and that's fine, but some things that you're able to kind of use, and you just kind of, it's a good way to know what the current trends are or hear people's perspective about what's important to know, now if you're trying to find the next thing to learn.
Oh, that's a really good idea, especially because you can do it as you're driving or walking around the
Yeah.
block or whatever. So you can multitask, even if you don't absorb it all. You absorb some of it, and then you hear like some things over and over again. So that's awesome. Yingrong had a really good suggestion, which is participating in an open source project, which really dovetails really nicely into our next meetup, which is all about how to do open source. So if you're new to open source, don't miss that. And there's also a Code for Atlanta group in Atlanta, obviously. They usually typically meets at ATV, but I think right now they're doing everything virtually. But that's a really good way of combining doing an open source project and also getting to know people. And that's a great way to show off your skills and show off your attitude. And one of the things that I think people look for when they're interviewing is like somebody who is going to be good to work with. They're going to, they want to do the work, they're interested, they're flexible, all those things that you want somebody to be. So if you've already demonstrated that, working with somebody on some open source, that's a great way for somebody to feel really comfortable advocating for you.
Yeah, I attended a couple of their events too, and it was really nice because you're actually helping, actual businesses, small businesses or startups that are right here in Atlanta. And so you're really making a difference too. It's kind of like volunteering and learning. And as Beth mentioned, it's usually like over time. So if you want to commit to a certain project, they're ready for you. They need help. So it's a good way to plug in for sure too.
And I would put 48 and 48 in that same category, which is like
Mhm.
it's making websites for nonprofits. So it's similar, but it's just I think it's over a weekend, so it's 48
Mhm.
hours. But yeah, somebody's kind of done the work of making sure that these nonprofits are, really nonprofits and what they need and helping them think through what they need so you don't have to, it's not quite as laborious. But hackathons are also a good way to sort of get in there in a, short commitment. And if one of the other things for all of these, but especially hackathons, sometimes people are like, well, I don't know. So we used to have hackathons, Women Who Code hackathons, and we did that because we wanted people to have a hackathon they could be comfortable as their first hackathon. And that was really great. And one of the things that we learned and that people felt more comfortable doing is just because you're new doesn't mean you can't contribute. I mean, you might come to a hackathon and you might want to go into project management or product management or something along those lines. A team needs that. A team needs somebody who's going to organize stuff because you can't just have people kind of going and starting to code. You need to figure out what you're doing. What are the requirements? All that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of roles in these that don't necessarily mean that you're actually typing into a computer or typing code anyway. You probably are
Mhm.
typing into a computer.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's good.
So I feel like I feel like we've answered a lot of questions in the chat. There are a couple of suggestions of articles and things like that. But I definitely feel like a lot of people were asking about um, just kind of how to break through that barrier and get into, you know, you can't get the job if you can't get to the interview. So you kind of have to take it step by step. So the job of your resume is to get you an interview, and then the job of the interview is to get you a job. So if there are ways that you can help your resume do its job, like making connections with people and things like that, I think that that's a lot of what we see happening at a lot of meetups just around. And I think a lot more meetups are starting to have virtual events, and that's also a great way to sort of figure out who's there, look up and see if you know some people who are attending the meetup, and maybe get to introduce yourself and see if you could have like virtual coffee, have 15 minutes to ask them about their job or their company, things like that. So you're really looking for ways to differentiate yourself. I don't know if you have any other suggestions along those lines, Amy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really good. And yeah, just really pick what you're going to do to make your resume, because that's probably the first thing that's going to happen, right? Even so, let's say you make a connection, they're probably going to ask you to get your resume. And I mean, they may or may not, have like hiring power or anything, but sometimes that's okay. Um, yeah, it's just you want to bypass the recruiters and the automated application submissions as much as you can. It's not, I mean, for me, I kind of realize it's kind of a waste of time if you already know that your resume is not going to meet the little automated thing, oh, it's computer science degree or, whatever it is. If you don't have it, put your time, because we all have only so much time. So you want to put your time towards what's going to be the differentiator, for you.
Has anybody kind of found any secret ways in? Anybody have any advice to offer? Because I think everybody has the ability to unmute.
I can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, Amy. um, yeah, I would say LinkedIn is a really good one to connect with people. I know it's been stated before, reaching out to people that have similar goals, like if you have a goal and then reaching out to them and saying like, hey, how did you do this? Or instead of not necessarily reaching out to them for a particular job, because I don't think people want to see other people as, I don't know. I mean, that's fine, and I don't think that's a bad thing. But I think if they probably have some wisdom to give you on your career path that you can learn from them, and that might be even more valuable. But I think it's been valuable to me. Like I've gotten like a job before just because I reached out to someone previously on LinkedIn, like, a year ago or like, something like that. And then, I followed them up with them when I applied to that company. So, and just keeping those connections, I think is important. And that was all virtual. So I'd never had met them in person. So I think that's, just something to keep in mind. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. That's really a good suggestion. LinkedIn is super useful for that. I would say two other suggestions around LinkedIn. One is when you do get that interview, go on LinkedIn and see if you can figure out who you're talking to or people that you may be connected to. And even if you just ping somebody and say, hey, I'm interviewing at your company, I see we both know Amy, like that's awesome. And maybe they can give you some pointers. And the other thing is, like, before you go for an interview, please, please, please take some time and do some research on that company. You should know what they do. You should know a little bit about their story. Like larger companies, obviously more complicated, but if you're, you should know some things about that company. Like if you're interviewing with AT&T, it's a whole lot different than interviewing with Salesloft, which is a local company, or MailChimp, which is a local company. Um, but yeah, that's something that always makes me sad when somebody comes in the first 10 minutes, you're like, did nothing. You don't know anything at all. It doesn't sit well with any interviewer that I've ever talked to. Anybody else have either advice to offer or questions to ask and want to unmute and do that?
Hi, my name is Jolene. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I have a follow-up question about a comment that was made earlier about getting into the career via the front end. And I'm curious if you have seen that as the truth, I guess, quote unquote. I'm not sure I want to go into the front end. I think I want to go into the back end, but I am also self-teaching and not doing a boot camp, not doing a formal degree. So I was curious if you could elaborate more on that.
I honestly, I don't want to, discourage you because I only have my own experience to say from, but does anybody else, does anyone know anyone who their first job was on the back end? I think actually, um, what's her name? Another woman who has spoken at Women Who Code events and did a boot camp. I think she calls herself like the DevOps queen or queen of the YAMLs.
Oh, that's Valerie Regis.
Yeah, I wonder if her first job may have been on the back end.
Her first job was as a DevOps engineer. So yeah. So
there you go. Yeah. So.
My first job is also in backend. I started as a C# developer.
Nice.
Do you want to talk a little bit about how you got your job?
I was kind of lucky, to be honest. I was working at a mortgage company in the IT department already in a job that's kind of like a baby developer. It was called like configuration analyst, and I'm just kind of updating and maintaining some of the stuff that the developers built. And then I was like, oh, well, I kind of want more. And so I did a boot camp, and I was able to transfer within my company to be a developer there.
That's awesome. I was imagining your business card, baby developer, but.
Hey, Beth,
No,
this is,
awesome.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Yingrong.
Yeah, I was just going to offer the other side of the story, because I started out I started from a boot camp, and so my first 2 jobs are all in front end, and I love backend, but I was not able to get anyone to hire me as a backend developer for the first 2 years. And right now I'm working as a backend engineer, but it took me 2 years to get here, and it was it was a rocky story. And I think there's nothing wrong with getting your foot into the door first, to get that experience first, because at least for me, what happened was I started as a front-end engineer, but then I was able to make more connections as I got my feet into the door, and started to meet more people, and started you talk with your coworkers. They have previous experience or previous companies that they know, and they can introduce you. And while you're gaining your experience, you have a kind of safety net that that you're having incomes right now, so you can have some extra time on the weekends to continue to learn about backend. And then eventually, when the opportunity comes, you can say that, yes, maybe I don't have backend specific experience, like professional working experience, but I have been working in a team, right? That's kind of the common area, that no matter you're on front end or back end, you are working with other people, you are working on a team, you are working a code base. All those knowledges can be transferred from front end to back end, and you are going to have more, I guess, leverage to say that I can handle back end job through, working front end. I have already learned all this. If it's a specific knowledge, I can learn just like I learned front end. They're all the same. But it's definitely tough to try to get a backend job without a CS degree in general.
Yingrong,
It's definitely possible.
Do you think that if you had done like a back-end only boot camp that it would have been different?
I guess it also depends on what kind of backend job that that I'm applying for. If it's backend that's backend of just a API for a CRUD application, like a e-commerce site, then I feel like yes, that probably would be easier if I had done a backend focused bootcamp. But throughout my career applying for all kinds of backend jobs, every single time, as soon as they see that I don't have a CS degree, they kind of just automatically rejected me. Even with in-person connections, they kind of were like, at first they were like, oh yeah, send me your resume. As soon as I send my resume, they look at it and then they were like, actually. So I think they always value more like your working experience rather than what kind of education that you get. If you can prove that you already started working in related fields, they will feel like, okay, if someone already paid money for them to do this job, probably they can do it.
So I'm going to change tacks a little bit here. Saul asked a question about interviewers looking for experience in soft skills aside from or in addition to coding experience.
I mean, I'm not sure, anyone can also chime in, but I have seen that, I mean, I'm not sure if there's any job anywhere anymore where you're able to just work you yourself without, having to cooperate with somebody else. And so, I mean, the person who's hiring you wants to know that the experience of working with you will be, that will be okay, that you're going to be able to give feedback to, I mean, at least for my company, you're giving feedback so you have on people's code, so you have to be able to communicate and just kind of, I guess I don't have a great answer for it other than to say that, yeah, soft skills, it's the new world. It's a new world out there. It's not the old stereotype of you in your basement just hacking away. It's super collaborative. So there may be other articles or things out there if you're somebody that's trying to grow in that area. I'm sure there's a lot of, resources out there, but definitely I would say it's important for sure.
I would second that. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add, but you're welcome to unmute and do. And I would say that there's also two different kinds of soft skills that I would think companies are maybe looking for. One is, like Amy said, working as part of a team and being able to communicate and just work with other people. And then the other is if you're working for a company that does consulting, is you kind of have to be able to talk to the customer too. And that's a little bit of a different way of communicating, because you might be able to say to your coworker, like, that was not a good decision, but you can't really say it the same way to your client. So I'm noticing that people we're kind of getting to the end of our time. People are definitely very interested in this presentation. So we will have a recording and we will share that link in a couple of days. And if Amy is willing, we'd love to put the slide deck up on the meetup page so people could find all those great resources and stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
And that sounds great. Any last questions? And I would also, just one more plug for if anybody is like looking for a job or frustrated or wanting to connect, then getting on the Slack channel is really helpful. So
I had a quick question. I'm actually currently in a boot camp right now. Our main focus is JavaScript. And I was wondering, for most companies hiring nowadays, I've been seeing a lot of people that want Python or C# experience. Would you say that just having the JavaScript experience could get you a job, I guess, on the back end or with full stack development? Or do you need to add those skills with Python and C# as well?
Well, I mean, if I'm understanding correctly, it sounds like the boot camp is more so giving you preparation for front end. So, I mean, based upon what some others were saying as well, it may be more fruitful for you to angle yourself more towards your first job being a front end job. But I, like I said, I don't really want to pretend to be an authority on something when I'm not. I only know my own, personal experience. It may be possible, but it may be more so the statistics are in your favor for, going more the front end route. And I would say it's definitely possible to just do full stack JavaScript just to kind of show that you can, but then angle more towards front end and definitely hireable, from that.
yeah, I would second that. And I would, I think it's worthwhile spending some time on Node, which is JavaScript backend, so that you are full stack, but it probably is worth it to go deeper into JavaScript rather than trying to like know some JavaScript and some Python. I think you're better off going deep, and then you can always put frameworks on top of JavaScript where you would add Vue or Angular or React or whatever. But I would definitely go deep with JavaScript.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for coming, and hopefully we'll see you on Slack. You can always find us at